So this week's Parsha is Vayeshev. Go, 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 Joseph. Now, there are many songs that I could sing, but I'm not going to. I'm going to wait till Rabbi Keller is here next week for Isabel's bat mitzvah to sing. Will you be here next Shabbat? Oh, boy. It's going to be big Jewish fun. I'm so happy Rabbi Keller's coming in. Now, my daughter is mortified because her Parsha, next week's Parsha, Mikeh, it starts out with the Pharaoh's dreams about sheaves of corn and cows and fat cows and skinny cows. And I told her I'm going to sing my favorite song of the musical, which was the one that King Pharaoh. Well, I was wandering along. Little preview there. And she's pretty mortified about that. So there is, however, a really bizarre interruption to the story of Joseph in between the time that he is thrown into the pit, sold into slavery, and goes down to Egypt, and the next scene that we learn about, which is where he is working for Potiphar and Potiphar's wife, and there's a little bit of, apropos our world, a little bit of harassment that goes on. Nonetheless, there is chapter 38 of Genesis, which is the ignored chapter, the bizarre chapter, which does not fit in with anything that comes before it or anything that comes after it. In fact, the story of Joseph all the way through his getting sold into slavery and the brothers sort of flipping out a little bit that he's not there when they finally have a little guilt and go back to see him, and he's not there. And then they have to dip the coat into the blood and tell their father and lie to their father that he was torn up by a wild beast. And the part where he's in Potter's house, there is like as if the Torah is saying, we interrupt the previously scheduled program to bring you an update. It is the story of Judah and Tamar. And the story of Judah and Tamar is, as I said, strange and bizarre and fascinating. The story is interrupted by this narrative. It's one chapter, chapter 38, and it is in very short summary. Modern scholars point out that even though the Joseph narratives describe, I'm just going to read this here, the rise of Joseph, they also register the ascendancy of Judah. Judah is the namesake of what? By the way, Judah is the namesake of Judaism, of Jews, us. It is the southern and largest tribe, Judah, the largest tribe of the 12 tribes. And what is located in Judah? What city? Jerusalem. So the capital of the south in biblical times of Judah is Jerusalem. The capital of the north, the other tribes, is Bethel. So, two kingdoms resulted from God's promises from Abraham. Judah becomes the name of the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom of Israel became known as Joseph. Anyone living in the northern kingdom of Israel, this is, by the way, there was only a united kingdom of Israel from around 1200 BCE until around the end of King David's tenure, maybe a little bit into King Solomon's, when the north, after King Solomon's, when the north was destroyed by the Assyrians. But there was about a 200-year period where there were basically two nations within the borders of what we would now call Israel. The north was called Bnei Yosef, the children of Joseph, and the south, Bnei Yehudah, the children of Judah. So, by the way, P.S., herein lies the reason for this story. You see, the people who wrote the Torah, as Reformed Jews, modern Jews, whatever you want to call us, we believe that the Torah was written over a period of time by many different authors and edited together. It is what's called the documentary hypothesis, which hypothesizes that the Torah was different writers wrote the stories of the Torah and redacted them, edited them, and canonized them, probably over a 1,000-year period. What's really cool about it, though, is the style of the literature, the language that is used, And everything else, if you're a literary, if you get your BA in literature or your master's in literature, everything literary is very, very much the same, which is almost miraculous, which makes us know that this was inspired by God, because for something to be 1,000 years of collected stories to be the same in its style and in its use of motifs and all of that stuff is pretty cool. That's a whole different sermon. So the question is, what is this story? It's the story of Judah, who ends up with, after a series of very interesting events, I'm going to do the very PG version of it, with a woman named Tamar. And the most important part of this, it's a great story, but the most important part of the story is when Tamar, at the very end of the story, gives birth to twins. Now, we've heard about twins in the Bible just a few weeks ago when Esau and Jacob were born. And the Torah says that while Tamar was in labor, one of the twins put out his hand, and the midwife tied a crimson thread onto that hand to signify, oh, that one was first. They didn't have duct tape then, so they used crimson. You never duct tape a baby. So she ties the crimson to say this one come out, but just as she was tying this crimson, the baby pulled his hand back, and out came his brother instead. It's like a motif. It's like the same thing as with Esau and Jacob. There's this struggle, and who's going to be born first? And she says, what a breach you have for yourself. The midwife said this to Tamar. In those days, they didn't have OBGYNs. It was a midwife that did the delivery. What a breach you have. So she named him Perez, which means breach. Afterward, his brother came out, whose hand was the crimson thread, and his name was Zerah. And we don't even have an interpretation of what Zerah ultimately means. The question here is, why is the story of the birth of Judah's twins to Tamar even mentioned, let alone out of context, let alone in the middle of a story where it has nothing before it and nothing after it that ties into it whatsoever? Does anyone want to take a guess why this story is inserted here in the Torah? Someone put their hand up and then put their hand down. Speak. Do you want to speak? You can take a guess. Okay, so you put her hand down, and she was exactly right. She was exactly right. Sometimes we need to project in order, and maybe that's not the best word. We need to, well, think about it this way. Joseph is best known for dreams, right? He has dreams which are predictive. He knows what's going to happen. They come out in his dreams. He's a very good dream interpreter, as we know later on. But all throughout the story of Joseph, he has dreams which predict the future, and whatever he dreams happens. Well, the story is really about something that's going to happen later on. Does anyone know who comes from the line of Judah and Tamar through these twins? Which famous person in the Torah comes from these two? We know that Judah comes from the Jews. That's kind of important. Who comes from this whole line of Judah and Tamar? King David. Important. King David, the one who built Jerusalem, the city of David in Jerusalem. His son, King Solomon, builds the first temple because David is seen, according to tradition, as a warrior. He's a military guy, and God didn't want a military guy, a warrior, building his holy temple. So that gets assigned to King Solomon, who's the lover, not a fighter. 900 plus wives, he's, right? Now, why is King David, think as a Jew, think as a more traditional Jew, why is King David so important? Who comes from the line of David? By the way, Ruth is in this line too. The famous Ruth, the first person to convert to Judaism. Who comes from the line of David? And we haven't met this person yet. If you're, the Mashiach, the Messiah, comes from the line of David. So if you are an observant Jew, a Jew who lives by the tradition as it is written, the line of David leads to the Messiah. The Messiah's job, the anointed what of Israel, the anointed king of Israel, is to, in our interpretation of the Reform movement, we say the Messianic era, is to bring the world to peace, right? In Jewish tradition, our Messiah comes because we as human beings have made the world at peace, and the Messiah comes to reign over a time of eternal peace. As opposed to other traditions where the Messiah comes because the world is chaotic, and the Messiah comes to save or heal the world. We have to do that work in Judaism, and then the Messiah comes, and so thus the Messianic era, or Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, the son of David, it's in the song that we sing at Passover and at Havdalah, comes from the line of Judah, which comes from this Torah portion. So back to your beautiful answer, it is inserted into this story. Maybe there was nowhere else to insert it, because the Torah wants us to know, because some kid somewhere along the way said, where does the line of David start? Where does the tradition that we will have a Mashiach come from? Who's the progenitor? See, Genesis is all about progenitors. It's all about the father and the mother, the matriarch and the patriarch of the Jews, of the Christians, of the Muslims. It's all about genealogies and who comes from who. And this is a very not just necessary but important story. That leads us to this week. See, I don't have an issue with what the president did the other day. And I don't understand sometimes why Jewish people, Americans, are not have an issue with this kind of a comment for two reasons. First of all, every presidential candidate I have ever seen at anything AIPAC has only said and promised what the president did this week by making Jerusalem the capital, quote-unquote, capital of Israel and moving the embassy there. They've all promised it. When they are kowtowing to Jews for votes, they say it. The only difference is that this week it was done. An inevitability that had been postponed, and I say an inevitability because everyone since I'm born, except for Jimmy Carter, of course, everyone since I'm born has promised this. Every single one. But more importantly, we learned from this week's Parsha that Jerusalem has been the capital, quote-unquote capital, the center point, the focal point, the apex of the Jewish world since this week's Torah portion, which we believe took place around 3,500 years ago. Before there were even Christians or Muslims, before there was a Jesus or a Muhammad, way before, like over 1,000 years before. King David, the guy who comes from Tamar and Judah, the tribe of Judah, all of that is thousands of years old. And to hold up, it's as if the world says to us, everyone else is entitled to their biblical history and their biblical stories and their biblical characters except the Jews. The Jews aren't entitled to a story or a narrative or a birthright. Everyone else is. I think what we learned this week is two things. Number one is Jews don't know their history. It's shameful that our movement condemned this action, in my opinion. It's shameful. What Jew condemns the affirmation of a story and a place that is 3,500 years old, that existed before there were Muslims or Christians by 1,000+ years? Who does that? That's hard for me to grapple with. I talked about this, by the way, with the confirmands last night for 45 minutes. It was a great conversation. But I don't think Jews even recognize or understand our history and its validity, whether the story happened or not. That's our story, and we're entitled to our story and our narrative, regardless of the political implications and hurt feelings of others. We're entitled to that just like everyone else is. The second thing we learned this week, the second thing, the world doesn't really like us very much. I mean, you all knew that, and I hate saying that. I really hate, and that's a strong word. I hate to say that. But the people who condemn Israel, see, it's all Israel's fault. Everything is the Jews' fault. Everything. The hostility and the riots and the uprisings and, God forbid, the third intifada, that'll be our fault too. Not the fault of the person carrying the gun or the knife or wielding the violence-seeking instrument. That's not their fault. It's our fault. But Europe doesn't really like us. The UN hates us. It is the way that it is, so I think, alachat kama v'kama, all the more so, we need to reclaim the story of Judah and Tamar, the story that we're going to read tomorrow morning, and we need to reclaim and validate for ourselves, let alone the rest of the world, that we have a narrative too, that we have a story too, and that this place, this very place, Jerusalem, is not just the center point, the focal point of the Jewish people, but has been for 3,500 years before any other Western religion existed by a lot. On this Shabbat, I really, really hope everyone will study their Torah, will read the commentaries, will look at the archaeology, will accept the history, and will live the narrative, Am Yisrael Chai, that the people of Israel will live, that Jerusalem is ours, not that we're not open to negotiation. I would say it's safe to say that the Israeli government has been open to negotiation, especially the 4 times that they offered in the last 20 years, 98 to 99% of what it is that the Palestinians wanted and were rejected each and every time. But Jerusalem is the capital of not just Israel, the state, not just Israel, the land, but of the people of Israel, of us. We are descendants of Judah and Tamar. This story is here. It doesn't mean that this exactly happened, but it means it's true for us. And it is so. And we, above all else, need to accept for once and for all that our story is real and valid, and our narrative is no longer open for attack because people don't like us. Shabbat Shalom.